Well, hello everyone. Welcome to what in the last few seconds I have decided will be called something like Martin's Midweek Musings, which really is completely false advertising because I have no specific intention for these to be midweek. But I just have this thing in my head that maybe I'll release weekly episodes on a Sunday, and there'll be longer ones and then shorter ones midweek. But anyway, irrelevant. There's really no plan for this podcast, but that kind of relates to what I'm going to talk about now. So funnily enough, I'm literally laid in bed. So if you're on a watching platform, apologies, you're looking at some sort of image. And it won't be a great deal different for those of you on listening platforms, other than maybe slightly lower sound quality. I'm really hoping that the quality will be okay. I almost chopped recording this because I had my phone on like a nightstand thing and I was recording just through the phone and you could hear my radiator clicking in the background. And then I found this little lav mic that I keep in my bag attached, and it seems to be okay quality on my 5-second test. Anyway, on to the quick lol. We'll see if it's quick. Episode musing. Basically, I do want to get in this mindset of recording you short episodes, because some of you I know really enjoy short ones. Wait. Bodes well for me. No, it doesn't bode well for me actually. I'm always take too long. So, oh jeez. Right, well I'm just laid down in bed and I'm not particularly tired, but I wanted to try and get an early night, so I picked up one of the only books I've ever read more than a page of. I've read about 3 pages of it in my life, and that is The Daily Stoic. And so I've read, in this book, this sounds funny, right? I would highly recommend it, simply because I know what it contains. 366 meditations on wisdom, perseverance, and the art of living. But it's based on Stoicism. And if you don't know, Stoicism is basically a philosophy and a way of thinking about life and living virtuously, leading a good life. But it has lots of just really good ways of focusing your mind, ways of thinking about situations, which if you ponder over a long period of time, truly change. It can truly change the way you think about life. And one of the, actually something I said in my stories today, the day I'm recording this is the day, the Monday after Boris cancelled Christmas in the UK for many people. I said in my stories about, this whole thing of gratitude, and gratitude is a huge part of Stoic teachings. And lots of people get upset when they see stuff about gratitude because they create a false dichotomy. So the kind of a false dichotomy is when two things can't exist at the same time, essentially. I find it's good to define things like that, false dichotomy, because people use these terms, and then if you're like me, you go and look them up, and then you learn them, and then you use them yourselves, and you just end up leaving some people confused. So anyway, people create this false dichotomy that when someone talks about, focus on gratitude, focus on what you can be grateful for, that you can't also be sad at the same time. And a cool thing about Stoicism is this idea of, it is interesting. It has some interesting things, like basically expect the worst. Like life, I think there is probably a quote somewhere that's something about life is suffering. Maybe that's Viktor Frankl. But life is suffering, and finding meaning in your suffering is how you'll find your purpose in life. Something like that. That sounds very Viktor Frankl, actually. Anyway, Stoicism, essentially it's like life is crap. Life will throw you curveballs. But if you kind of expect the worst and you realise that life is full of bad situations and suffering, and you accept the fate of death and stuff like that these things happen, you basically set yourself up for a win. It's like almost don't set your sights too high, which again can sound demotivating, but essentially it's a case of, if something blindsides you, it often causes you the most amount of pain. I often talk about differentials. And if you've been on cloud nine, or if you're used to a certain way of living, or you're just used to anything, and then there's a big differential, it hurts. People who are used to living, let's say, without lots of luxury, or without just basic luxuries, get great joy from the most basic of things. Whereas people with lots of privilege and luxuries, they then lose those. Often they find it really difficult. So, with this thing of Stoicism, it's this thing of being prepared for the worst, expecting the worst almost, and anything better is a bonus. And so anyway, when I talked about gratitude, it's like you can feel bad, you can feel sad, and you should accept those feelings, and you should allow yourself to feel them. And if one of your friends, I've been thinking about doing a podcast on this, and now it's come into my brain because of this random rambling that I hope you're enjoying. Just checking if it's still recording. Yeah. If one of your friends comes and says that they're feeling down or something bad has happened, one of the worst things you can do is dismiss it with what some people think is helpful. And often, as a well-meaning friend, people might say this, but it could be worse. It doesn't make anyone feel better. It's just, I've heard this term used a couple of times recently, toxic positivity. And, dismissing negative feelings, dismissing sadness, and just going kind of like a get over it. Just cheer up. It could be worse. Or it'll all be better tomorrow. Just anything that's just this, I call it false positivity. Or often I say, I use this term often in MNU, reverting to type. And people just kind of, maybe it's not reverting to type so much. It's essentially false positivity or false assurance, and part of hostage negotiations. They talk about stuff like this, where making disingenuous statements that are clearly disingenuous. If someone just goes, I'm sure it'll be all right. Well, how are you sure? How do you know? Why are you so sure? Because sometimes things aren't all right and they go wrong, and yes, another door might open, or yes, it might lead to something better, but you don't know that that's the case. Maybe actually something bad happens, and I'm keeping this very broad because there's no arguing against it. I hope it'll be okay. Oh, cool. Well, I've got terminal cancer. Oh, it'll be okay. Will it? It's this false positivity. Oh, I've got this exam. I'm really worried. I'm sure you'll do well. Are you? How do you know? What if I have a panic attack in the exam? That's a specific example I've given to my staff in the past when talking to students. Don't fill people with false hope. Be true in your words. Make sure the words you're saying are genuine and they're meaningful. In hostage negotiations, if someone says, you're a clever guy, and they're talking to someone who clearly lacks an academic background, they're someone who doesn't speak very well or something like this because they haven't been at school or whatever, rather than saying, you've got street smarts or you're clever, straight away, how do you know I'm clever? I'm not clever. I don't believe myself to be clever. It's just disingenuous. So anyway, trying to trace my steps back to where I was. But as a friend, don't give this false positivity. Allow people to hear. Listen to them, feel their pain. And that's the same with yourself. Feel your sadness. And I talk a lot about this term, or this word, acceptance. Like, accept that you're sad. When Boris' announcement came up, I was gutted. I was really, really sad. It took me by surprise. It was such horrible news. For reasons I won't go into, for me. And I was really sad. And but sometimes it's this sad, and then you just get into a downward spiral, and you don't at some point start to try and take yourself out of that. And also judging yourself if you're like, okay, I need to think of all the positives, and you keep doing that, and then you come back to some sadness and going, I failed. You haven't failed. And that's the whole thing with Stoicism, as I started to say earlier, is changing your thoughts. Over time, you learn to get better at controlling them. And so the thing I said on my story today is, if you start to change your thoughts, and now I forget the person who said this, but he's this brilliant psychologist. I'll maybe try and put his name in the show notes. I rarely use the show notes of my podcast well. But if I remember his name, I'll put him in the show notes if you're particularly interested. But this well-known psychologist talks about this thing of, we need to change our thoughts before we can change our feelings. And once we then change our feelings, we can then change our behaviours. And he speaks about why New Year's resolutions don't ever work, or don't often work, because people just talk about changing the behaviours. We need to change our thoughts first. And I was interested when I heard him say this. It was only a snippet. But then I asked myself, well, what things can you do to change your thoughts? And I imagine he's got lots of amazing techniques that people can use. But again, just lots of it is training the mind. Practicing. Every single time you're have a negative emotion, or you're dealing with a negative situation, 2020 has been great practice, right? Or it could have been, sorry. It certainly was for me, because I have done this on purpose. And it's being intentional with these things, taking each situation, and trying to run with gratitude, trying to run with a positive outlook on it, but not dismissing your feelings about it. So yeah, it's funny. That's basically my intro. That's nothing to do with what I'm talking about here. But this book, The Daily Stoic, I've read a couple of pages of it, and the reason I would recommend it is because I use much of what I know is contained in here in daily life, and it massively helps me. And this isn't just me. Like, lots of this stuff is, I've spoken about gratitude before, and we've got this understanding that it's used in therapy, and it's regularly used as a tool to improve people's mental state. And there's so much within Stoicism that I feel like people can benefit from. Some of it, I guess one of the reasons it hugely resonated with me is because I read it and said, I do that. And it really does work. That's really cool. It's a bit of confirmation bias, but then you start to learn more and more from it. Anyway, so on to the actual topic that I just wanted to do, because I hope it will, I always hope those random tangents and stuff that I've spoken about there will stimulate your grey matter, will maybe encourage you, maybe inspire you. And so the purpose of this is for that very reason, because I actually felt slightly encouraged and inspired by what I read here. And please don't think that the irony is lost on me here. So I turn to today's date, the 22nd of December in this book, and I'll read you what it says. For it is disgraceful for an old person, or one in sight of old age, to only have the knowledge carried in their notebooks. So just to explain that, all of these philosophers and people in these olden times, they seem to carry these notebooks and write down all of these things that they learn from all of these badass other philosophers and stuff. And sorry, I keep getting distracted because my bedside lamp thingy that charges my phone keeps flashing. It's a bit weird. Anyway, carry these notebooks. So let me carry on. Zeno said this. What do you say? Cleanthes said that. What do you say? How long will you be compelled by the claims of another? Take charge and stake your own claim. Something posterity will carry in its notebook. So that was Seneca. So it might be a bit confusing, right? But basically, let me just read you this little bit underneath. So Ralph Waldo Emerson, who's also someone who people quote all the time, he wrote, it says, Ralph Waldo Emerson complained how writers dance around a difficult topic by relying on quotes. I hate quotation, he wrote. Tell me what you know. And it was really cool, right? Because as I was reading this, it actually spoke to me. And it's funny because I'm reading quotations by other people to then talk about tell me what you know. And it's kind of given me an encouragement because around these types of episodes and my wisdom episodes, and it says here, your own experiences have value. You have accumulated your own wisdom too. Stake your claim. Put something down for the ages in words and also in example. And so basically, yeah, I was just encouraged in that. I've said before, wisdom's such a bold title. I've also said before that I feel like I am wise in many ways. Wise for my years. And but have this imposter syndrome around some of these episodes. And so yeah, I just thought it was super cool reading that yeah, we do have our own experiences, and we can learn from them if we're reflective. Everyone has experiences, as some people just maybe reflect on them a bit better. If I have an experience and I fail, but I reflect, it's not really a failure. It's this opportunity to learn. And if I do something and I am present in how I go about doing that thing and I achieve, then again, I learn something. Sometimes we just kind of meander along, fumble our way through. And maybe through reflecting on that, we can learn something. But sometimes we end at the goal and be like, I don't really know how I got there. But if you reflect, we can garner wisdom from both failures and successes, and lots of my stuff in business. I don't regard myself as a business guru or knowing a huge amount about business. But I think a lot, I reflect on things, and I'm able to teach people little bits about business through my own successes and failures. And so, yeah, I just want to give that encouragement. I know some of you listening to this, I know for a fact at least 2 of you listening to this want to start your own podcast. And because you have reached out to me about it. And so I hope that you will listen to this and you will gain some encouragement from this. And so I'll just read you this little final bit. It says, Seneca was throwing down the same gauntlet some 20 centuries before. It's easier to quote to rely on these wise words of others, especially when the people you're deferring to are such towering figures. So when I read that, I thought, in nutrition, people see me as this towering figure. It's funny, it's humbling for me that that's the case. But if I'm honest and frank, that is how people see me. It's very cool. And then it goes on to say, it's harder and more intimidating to venture out on your own and express your own thoughts. But how do you think those wise and true quotes from those towering figures were created in the first place? So yeah, that's my encouragement for some of you. It doesn't have to be a podcast, those of you wanting to help others. If you have knowledge in your brain, if you have life experience that you've learnt from, don't be afraid to put yourself out there. And as I've said before about elements in confidence, if you have no ego, if you are humble, if you're willing to learn from mistakes, you don't need to be afraid of people calling you out or challenging you. If you're open to discourse, I think that's the right word. Alexa, what's the definition of discourse?
As a noun, discourse is usually defined as communication of thought by words.
There you go.
Conversation. As a verb, discourse is usually defined as to communicate thoughts orally, talk, converse.
Alexa, stop. There you go. God, my podcast, you learn everything. Hopefully you heard Alexa. But yeah, discourse, communication. So if you're happy to have discourse over the topic that you're speaking on, then great. You only need to worry about putting yourself out there is if you think you're too big and too clever and too important to not ever be wrong. Yeah, anyway, cool. This wasn't as short as I imagined. 22 flipping minutes. How have I been talking for 22 minutes? It's 1 o'clock in the morning. Anyway, we'll do more of these. Let me know what you think. Chilled out vibe. I've just literally laid on my back looking at my ceiling. Weird. Anyway, sending you much love. Until next time.